My background is I've been at this sort of space of the role of business in poverty and in addressing social issues for more than 25 years. What I really want to talk about is this opportunity and what it means to think about addressing the base of the pyramid. Rector Kondo gave a great introduction about the need for innovation and the new challenges that are out. Dean Faber was talking a lot about sort of the need for individuals to commit to really think about doing something different. And Andrea certainly talked a lot about kind of the need to build a community around this. So it sort of sets the table for me very nicely. I put this picture up just to get us started. And we're in INCAE, it's a beautiful place, but we're not really in the base of the pyramid, right? So I want to take you there a little bit. What is this a picture of? Who knows? What is this a picture of? What am I looking at? I took this picture actually in Malawi. So I worked in Malawi for 2 years, and this was in 1989, so I'm not quite, that was 25 years ago. Right. I'm looking through a window at a school, okay? Do you see any desks, books, right? There's one teacher, teaches pretty much all the subjects to all ages, right? And so if you come to my office, you'll see this. And one of the reasons I put this up is that, that group of students, on average, is just as smart as this group here, right? We sometimes forget that. They're just as smart as we are. We were fortunate to be born where we were born, right? And that's, a very important thing to remember. They're, the base of the pyramid, sometimes we objectify them they, but the people, the individuals in the base of the pyramid are just as smart, just as capable as we are, but we got some really neat benefits based on where we were born. And the other thing to remember is, when we think about us and our lives, we and the way we transact and live and use facilities and healthcare and education, we are part of the vast, vast, vast minority of this world. Most people do not live the way we do. And there's a real danger of transposing how we think and how we live onto the majority of the world, and that's fundamentally flawed, right? And that's a big challenge at the base of the pyramid, is to change the way we think. And we're also talking about business, and we're not reinventing business, but we need to think about doing business very differently, right? We're still going to be talking about, the need for a deep understanding of our customers, the need to create competitive advantage, but in BOP markets, the way to do this is quite different, and that's what we want to talk about, and that's what I want to talk about today. But the big idea behind this isn't simple. This is about transformational change. We're talking about business for the majority of the world, right? The base of the pyramid, depending on how you define it, I think the rector offered a fine definition of $8 a day, PPP. There's a lot of argument, but that accounts for somewhere between 4 to 5 billion people. And how many people are on this planet? About 7 billion. So, that is somewhere between, a half and 2/3 of the world, the majority of the world. And if we're going to do this, this isn't about an incremental change. This is about transformation. But there's some things that are really in our favor, okay? And the most important thing to think about is actually kind of alignment and bringing people together. And I think there's really, and this is actually the title of a book I have forthcoming, Fulfilling the BOP Promise. And part of the idea behind this is there's actually reasons that business and social institutions can work together. And I don't think to really achieve the scale we want, either can do it individually. I think development organizations face the challenge that they have to achieve scale for their impacts. And I think for business, they need new partners, right? So both sides needs to do some things. And I'll show you kind of the logic of it. Business, if you think about it, and I hope you can see it in the back, and I'm sorry that it's usually pretty good, but maybe the font isn't quite big enough for you in the back. But basically it says that the business challenge, businesses are always looking for growth, right? They have to find new customers, they need to locate new sources of supply, they need to create value. So there's always this idea of where are the new opportunities, the organic growth of the future. And for the development community, they need a scale. And I think, having worked in both spaces, development community, they do wonderful work. But the question we have to ask is, what happens when the money runs out? Because the money always runs out. Is it sustainable? Will it last beyond that? And more importantly, will it scale? Because we're talking about 4 billion people, right? And the challenge for the development community, rather than needing customers, they have too many customers. They need to support local producers, and they need to alleviate poverty, which, guess what, is all about creating value for the base of the pyramid. So there's actually some really interesting alignment between the two. Now, the two sectors have generally worked relatively independently of each other, and I think they still do, and there's a lot of biases about one against the other. Businesses think that the development sector is a bunch of, fuzzy green people that don't understand profit, and the development sector tends to think of business people as kind of, if you will, I hate to say it, kind of greedy and profit motivated and not really understanding social issues. Just to put this in context, some of the most despicable, greedy people I've ever met work in the nonprofit community, right? We got to get rid of these biases. There are great people across all the sectors, and the idea is they're beginning to think about these issues in the same manner. There's still some differences, there's some challenges, but we need to bridge that. And what we're going to talk about is the development of BOP impact enterprises. And I'm going to offer you a definition, something Urs wanted. I don't know if we'll have time to debate it now, but I'm actually going to do a session after this where we can talk a lot more about this. But the idea is we're not thinking about a whole new type of business, but it really is about enterprises that are focused and working in base of the pyramid markets, which are very, very challenging contexts to operate in. It's about seeking financial sustainability and scale. So it's not about small pilot projects. It's not about donation-based activities. It's about something that's sustainable and can scale. And then importantly, it's about net positive change and well-being. So they're actively, proactively managing towards this. So it's not sort of a peripheral benefit. It's a core part of the strategy about generating, net well-being, net changes in well-being. But that's just the same way of saying it's focused on creating net value, right? It's just when you go in the development community and you start serving the base of the pyramid, you need to think about other language. We can talk about creating value, but it's also the same as net positive changes in well-being. So we just want to make sure we get our terminology aligned across sectors. So why now? We've sort of talked about this taking off. We know some companies have been doing this for a while on their own, but why is it so important now? What's changed in the last decade or so that's really driving this? What's the big change that's making this even more exciting? Can you think of any? All these smart people in front, come on. All right, well, you can mull it in your mind, but I'm going to argue that the big change is population growth, okay? So just to give you an example, and Stu is the one that actually introduced me to this way of thinking about it, so thanks, Stu. It's sort of growth. We talked about growth, so we're at 7 billion. We're going to grow to about 9 or 10 billion people on this planet, right? We have 4 to 5 billion right now that we call in the base of the pyramid. If you think about future growth, where do you think the next 2 or 3 billion are going to be born to? What's the projected sort of growth, population growth in the US, Japan, Europe, right? So most of the future growth, most of the next 2 to 3 billion are going to be in the base of the pyramid too. So if you've got a business opportunity, it only gets more exciting. If you've got a development challenge, it's even more difficult looking ahead. I'm not going to, there are just some numbers here. And another way to look at this is someone standing on the stage was born in 1963. I'm not who it was. But when that person was born, the world's population was 3.2 billion, right? That person turned 50 a year and a half ago. In 50 years, 4 billion people were added to this planet, right? Think about that. 4 billion new people. And if this person hopefully will make it to 87, maybe a little longer, right? All right, thank you. 9.2 billion, one lifetime. The world's population has nearly tripled with 6 billion more people. I mean, the growth has just been phenomenal in the interest. And the conversations changed. It used to be, generally it used to be business is part of the problem. And now more and more people are saying business can be part of the solution, right? I mean, business can still be part of the problem, but they can also play a major role in the solution. But how well do we really understand best practices in creating sustainable impact enterprises for the base of the pyramid? How do we really understand the opportunity for value creation? And what is the role of the development community in this, right? And I don't think we've figured this out, and that's our challenge ahead, is to really understand best practices. And I think Stu may pick up on this a little bit. He and I co-authored a book. Now it's been about 2 or 3 years. And the big point was, even in the BOP domain, we need to evolve our thinking. The original idea, which Stu and C.K. Prahalad came out, which was extraordinarily powerful, was around, is there a fortune at the base of the pyramid? And this is something I learned from C.K. Prahalad, which is, you got to make sure you're asking the right questions. And I would say that that is the wrong question. I think the rector mentioned this already. Businesses are already serving the poor, right? And if we decide today somehow that business is bad for the poor, is business going to stop serving the poor? So the right question is, how do we make business better for the poor, right? It doesn't mean there aren't problems, but debating whether they're good or bad is really not going to get us where we want to go. We need to get them better. And again, the evolution of the domain is about asking better and better questions. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly, but an important aspect is, part of this is beginning to think about this as an innovation challenge. And I think a lot of enterprises have thought about this as an execution challenge. If I get the product right, you know, the old field of dreams, build it and they will come. And I think that's really flawed. The product has rarely been the hang-up. You know, there are lots and lots of, you know, clean water, clean cook stoves, you know, solar generation. The business model has been the real sticking point. And that's been the challenge for companies, is to begin to think about, how do we not focus on executing, but how do we focus on innovating in our business models? The point, there's just some really important points, is that what we want to do is not focus on flawless execution, especially at first. We need to inspire creativity. We need to allow ourselves to invent new models. So we need to think a little bit more about innovation in our business models and set ourselves up to encourage experimentation. And the key is to start with the right framing in doing this. You guys can say, yeah, that all makes sense. But how do you begin to think about this more robustly? And I like to use this to get you to think about the world a little differently, have a different framework. So can you envision a map of the world in your mind's eye? What does it look like? Who's in the center of the map? Nicaragua. Okay, that's an interesting answer. That's not bad. Yeah, I guess it depends on who draws it, right? If the Americans draw it, America's in the center. If the Europeans draw it, Europe's in the center. So the maps look a little different. But what happens if all the maps look like that, right? Who's in the center now? Brazilians usually love this map, right? Africa's now in the center. If all the maps were drawn like that, you know, we might just think about the world a little differently. But has the world changed? Right? We didn't fall off just because we decided south was up instead of north. Right? And that's what we need to do, is the world doesn't change, but the way we think about it needs to change. And that's sort of part of the base of the pyramid, and I'll use that sort of in a more relevant example whoops. Sorry. You know, for you guys, and I used this yesterday for the folks that were here, but when you think about it now, think of 3 words that you would use to describe the base of the pyramid, right? Think in your mind for just a second. I'm not going to call on anyone, it's too big a crowd. But you know, some of you may have thought, well, they lack money, health care, they're isolated, they're far off. And we tend to think a lot about what they don't have, right? But how about if we think about them instead as colleagues, partners, and advisors? Right? If we are going to do this, we have to think about the base of the pyramid in a very different way. If we think about how all the things they lack, it's very it's very generous, but it's also very paternalistic. We're here to help you. We are the experts, you are the recipients, right? We know, you learn. And that's the wrong model. It's about co-creation, and if you can't co-create with the base of the pyramid, the chances of being successful are pretty small. Now that level of co-creation can vary depending on what you're trying to do, but no business would ever start or try and expand without a deep conversation with their customers. I was the general manager of a joint venture, but this was my top management team, right? So the guy on the far right, Zafros Zamzami, was procurement manager. Two guys sitting on either ends are head of the local Cooperaça unit DESA, so they were actually on my board. Some farmers, some other colleagues. This is how you have to begin to think about your team in base of the pyramid. It doesn't look that familiar, but that's, to me, that's the reality. All right, so I'm going to sort of bring this to a close by sort of saying where I started with is we need to begin to think about building a set of tools to help enterprises be more successful. That's our, that's one of the things we have to do. It's not, we're mature enough a field, we've had successes and failures, we now have enough information to really begin to understand what works. And I frame this under three things. One is enterprise, to be successful, enterprise leaders need a set of guiding principles to run their enterprises based on creating value with the base of the pyramid that are integrated with development community investments, okay? So each one of these is crucial. How do we run better enterprises? How do we really think about value creation? And how do we do this in partnership with the development community, the idea I introduced in the beginning? And, so this is sort of I guess a teaser because I think, I forget exactly the time, but at 10 or 10:30 when we do the breakout, I'll be doing a session where we're going to spend some time digging into each of these. I don't have time, unfortunately, to do it with you en masse right now, but we'll talk about each one. And the upper left is really thinking about how do you make sure you've set yourself up to succeed. And I have seen enough ventures that if I look at it, I can tell when they're set up to fail. Right? We can't guarantee success, but we can make sure that the way they've set themselves up is going to maximize the likelihood of success. How do you begin to move from envisioning to pilot to expanding? And I call it, it's a framework for scale, right? To begin to think about moving through the process of scale through kind of the ideas of envisioning, piloting, expanding, through thinking about co-creation, invention, innovation, integration, embedding. What are those key ideas that need to kind of go through the ventures that go through scale, based on creating value for the poor? So this is a framework that it was published in the Harvard Business Review. So it's not a framework based on sort of impact assessment or monitoring evaluation. It's really trying to understand value creation. We use the example of microfinance. The rector used that, right? It's a great initiative, but it has two challenges. One, you mentioned we're getting rid of those nasty loan sharks, right? But another way of saying that is an outside business is defeating and wiping out the local business, right? Now, that we may not like them, but it's sort of like the Walmart effect. That we come in, we're going to have some negative impacts, right? And also, if you give people loans, what comes with a loan? Debt. Right? So microfinance is good, net positive, but it has some negatives. So what we want to do is be able to understand and enhance the positives and then understand and mitigate the negatives. There's nothing wrong with this, but that's how we create more value. And we can do it from the lens of understanding the impact on poverty, which is creating value for the base of the pyramid. And then there's sort of a spaghetti soup of support organizations literally spending billions of dollars in these efforts to support enterprises. So there are resources out there, but enterprises don't really understand that field or how to capture it. So the last thing we'll talk about is thinking about a framework where we can think about both placing the different development organizations and what they do, and then thinking about a strategy to build a portfolio of partners, or what I will call an ecosystem of partners. So again, beginning to address each of these, how do we build better ventures based on creating value with the poor that are integrated with development community resources? So I'm going to skip this slide and just say thank you. We want to reach transformational change. I think that's about achieving sustainability at scale. So I'll stop here. And I think you're now in for a real treat because Stu Hart follows me.